Okay, well, welcome. Welcome. It's December is finally here in some ways. Maybe some folks are like not wanting to be here yet, but the year is almost over for some of us, and for some of us, the year is over already. Playing again with the Metamasculine Folks Network. And welcome to our 32nd Kitchen Table Conversations. And today we have a very special guest, Corinne Sanchez from New Mexico with Table Women United, joining us in this conversation, as always, on what it means for men and masculine folks to be practicing healthy masculinity in our everyday lives with the current issues and the environment that we're in, and what does it look like in practice to be striving towards being healthy in the relationships that we're in as well too. So to give a chance and an opportunity for the other men and masculine folks here to share with you all who they are again. And then I will do a little bit of an intro with you all and for Corinne, and then we'll go from there about what the conversation will be about today.
Robert Southall, he, him, dialing in from Golden Valley.
Hello, everyone. Felix Martinez, pronouns he, him, and his, reporting from Eagan, Dakota land. Super happy to be here.
Hello, everyone. Serrano Robinson, he, him, his pronouns. I'm literally at Menace Peacemakers in Duluth right now. Thank you.
Hey everybody, my name's Sean Hayes. My pronouns are he, him, and his, and I am also up in Duluth, Minnesota.
Very cool. Thank you. Thank you, all of you. As I shared, we want to really be, I think, in this conversation, why we are asking Corinne to join us in this conversation is really thinking about like, what does it mean to have men journey in their own care for themselves and healing, and then healing collectively, right? And I think we've had some of these conversations amongst ourselves previously, and it's good, and I think it's valuable to have others who are doing similar work and same work to be able to join us, right? And I think Corinne, with the work that she's done for a very long time here and is deeply rooted in community, has really demonstrated and shown us what it means to collectively be in care of others, and to, as they would put it, meaning Corinne, their organization would put it, is to have some radical healing, right? And to have some radical hope in this. And I've known Corinne for, I don't know now, but when I can't remember, then that means we've known probably each other for a very long time. And so I'm thrilled and excited to have Corinne here to have this conversation about healing for men and masculine folks, and why it's so important for them and their organization and their community, particularly for their community, to have the men and masculine folks in their community really think about healing in drastically different ways as a strategy again, and as a way to build community, right, towards ending violence in the community. So that said, I really want to give a chance for Corinne to also be sharing about themselves, their organization, their work, anything else that they would like to share, and then we can go into the conversation.
All right. Sangitamu, everyone. Aloha for having me here. Uviak kinti na kawe okua pepovi omu na pohoge oinge iwire omu na Executive Director of Table Women United umu. So hello, everyone. Good morning. So glad to be here in this space with you all, talking about healing, talking about radical, collective, individual self-care, and collective care. And what does it mean to really look at our pains and look at our wounds? So I'm going to share a little bit about myself and Table Women United. So Table Women United has been around for 30 some years. They started this organization when I was just graduating from high school. So the women in my community, various women from different Tewa speaking communities got together and began to sit down, similar to this, around their kitchen tables, talking about what their families and their communities were struggling with, what they were struggling with in their homes. Many were coming from experiencing multiple forms of violence, experiencing the loss of loved ones to suicide, seeing the impacts of substance use in our communities directed at them. Yeah, and so in that space really began to share, a lot of times we hold these things to ourselves and we don't open up to people, but they began to talk about it and voice it. And I think that then has putting it on the table, right? Like putting it out there, recognizing that they weren't alone and that there were ways that they wanted to come together and change and heal and transform. And so from those early days, like really talking and getting educated with different scholars from our communities, our indigenous communities, Maria Yellowhorse Braveheart, Dr. Eduardo Duran, some of the people that were doing some early trauma work helped to influence us in that way. And so as I was graduating from high school and seeing, these powerful women talking and sharing, and it was an all volunteer organization. And since then has transformed to a nonprofit, and we now have a staff of 15. At our biggest, we had a staff of 18. We started out focusing on the issues that most impacted us. So environmental justice, right? Na'otokwiyo and protecting her and her gifts that give us life. And as Tewa people, as people, land-based people connected to our most sacred spaces, even with colonization, we've kept and maintained our attachment to our homelands. And we know the devastation of colonization across this country. Some communities weren't allowed to do that, right? And so we have our ceremonies and our songs, and it's all connected again to that relationship that we have with Na'otokwiyo, which is our Earth Mother. And so the women knew that that was something that we needed to continue to voice concern around and protection around. And as we then moved, we realized, and we were meeting, we realized that we're all impacted by sexual violence. We knew the devastation of domestic violence on our families, and people were talking about that in our early circles. But what wasn't really being talked about was the sexual violence. I think families and communities almost have an easier time. It's still difficult, right, to talk about domestic violence, intimate partner violence, interfamilial violence. But the sexual piece was really something that continues to be silenced in this country today, right? And so realizing that was another one of our focus areas. So gender-based violence and addressing that was key to the work that we're doing. And as we look at the holistic being of our relationships, that, we talked about sexual violence. We were running a program, we developed a culturally based program, ran that for 20 some years, and didn't really see a change in the prosecution rates, right? Or accountability within that criminal justice system. And so began to really talk about, like, how do we really prevent this? How do we prevent, how do we get to this place where women were seen as objects, where our kids are seen as property? And I think we all know the impact of colonization and genocide tactics and things like that. And so getting to this place of, that really disregard, and then the boarding schools and understanding how that happened and was meant to take away who who our essence was, right? Our power and our strength in our communities and our young people. Because again, the power of our communities is in our young people. Our ability to procreate and recreate and continue into that continuance was impacted by that. And so we were asking those questions again as women in our community around, how do we become parents? Who is teaching us the cultural ways and the cultural lens? And how do we learn about these things? And how do we, again, going back to how do we prevent child sexual abuse and that type of violence? And so we started our doula program over 15 years ago to really look at and address that. And we had mentors in Indian country, Gaji Cook, Anash Rabi out, the Wise Women's Gathering Place, these indigenous midwives that were practicing and reclaiming work. And so we infused that in our programming and, are now training doulas in our community. and we now in New Mexico have a New Mexico Doula Association, right? So from nothing to this place of really being able to impact change on a state and national level is really powerful. And the gender justice pieces has been like this movement of VAWA and movement of powerful women across our country and their allies and our supporters, right? Men and different men folks in our communities. And then moving into that place of like, you know, so we're looking at birth and birth justice and reproductive justice. And then really, again, going back into that prevention lens around like, okay, how do we end sexual violence? How do we prevent it? And how are young people learning about this and healthy sexuality? Because if we're talking about sexual violence, we have to also be talking about healthy sexuality. And we don't often do that, right? And so we started our Opting Healthy Sexuality Body Sovereignty Project about 15 years ago. We're about 10 years ago, we're getting into our third cycle of funding to support that from the feds. But for us, it wasn't a teen pregnancy prevention program. It really was, how do we nurture healthy beings? How are we communicating and having core values from our Tewa, our lineage, right? And so addressing it and talking about it. And the reality for us in running a sexual violence program for 20 some years was that we as women cannot do this on our own. The violence that is directed at us is coming from masculine men folks in our families, in our communities, and in the outside world, right? With the history of historical trauma, boarding schools, strategic government policies, to our most intimate relationships within our families and our communities, our men, our brothers, our uncles, our grandfathers, our relatives. And how do we speak out on that, right? So the work that we were doing with our women was really strengthening their core around their voice and who they are and what they believe. And then the realization that we cannot change this tide, we cannot transform without the men and the menfolk in our community. And so really began doing our work in engaging men and boys and realizing that all this journey is about healing. You know, it's about facing those things that we can control and those things that we can't control, and then figuring out where do we have control. And that all of this violence is about that power and control, right? It's others trying to control and dominate you. And so that's been the journey of Tewa Women United. And it's also been my personal journey, right? So they started in high school, and for me, as a survivor of child sexual abuse, as a survivor of sexual assault, as a survivor of witnessing domestic violence within my family and within my community and within the world, and the environmental racism and degradation, right, that our communities face and continue to face, which has meant, you know, all of these strategies and policies were meant to eradicate us, to make us invisible, to erase us. And I feel like the strength and the power of community and women has been around acknowledging it, voicing it. And I love, you know, Lena, you had her on this conversation around like that loving accountability. Like this is what it's about. It's about loving ourselves and loving those in our lives, and that accountability to responsibility that we have. We call it Sigimavi, right? In our Tewa, where it's respect for ourselves and others, and Na'ochokwiyo, so our Mother Earth, because we know that the environmental violence that we're also experiencing is, you know, that violence onto the land is violence onto our bodies. And so there's a lot that goes on around environmental degradation, and there's this braiding, what we call opedi in our language, is that braiding and weaving together. And so we cannot address just one of these. They're so intertwined that we need to address all of it. And oftentimes people are like, that's a lot, oh my God. But it's our life, right? There is no way that we can like separate ourselves and say this part and I'm gonna address this, because they are so intertwined in our very existence. And so I feel like being part of this organization has allowed me to go through a healing journey that I'm still on, right? I think we're all continuing to do that and be, and that there's things that are still challenging, but these conversations are amazing, and to be with you all and to share that connection across the country and across the globe is really powerful and transformative, and a place for that, for me, is that maintaining that radical hope, that we can transform it and we can change it, even in the most challenging and difficult times, that it's people across races that have come together to really do that work. And so, yeah, so I'm glad to be here with you all and open for discussion.
Thank you, Creed. It's so, I think, profound that in my initial reaction to what you were sharing was that you have to be so rooted in community and so based in community. And when we talked about community, it is like the entirety of everybody and the beings of everybody, right? And that the connections that people have with one another. And I think the other part of it that strikes me in terms of what you shared is that in most communities that we've seen, it's always been the women folks, the femme folks, and the queer folks, and the gender non-binary folks who have often take the lead in holding community and moving community and pushing community to its boundaries towards that transformation, towards that healing. I think what provokes me to think about, even in this conversation with you and with the other men and masculine folks here, that we haven't had a conversation really about deeply, is our connection as men and masculine folks to the environment and to the earth, and how we move through that with regards to what healing could potentially look like, right? And so I'm interested in that. I think that was something that from what you were sharing, that I was like, I think we haven't had that, and we haven't talked about that, and men don't talk about their relationship to the environment collectively, and they don't talk about the ways in which they relate to the earth and to the environment that they're in, besides being the hunters, right? Besides that part. And I know that, like, this past week, the week before that, at least people in Wisconsin, I know that because I was out with my manly men in my family out in the woods doing deer hunting because of it being gun season in Wisconsin. And with the men in my family having conversations, right, about familial ties and just being with them, but not having this conversation about our relationship to earth. And I wondered, like, how my family, meaning the men in my family, have had those conversations as they were out in the woods in Laos hunting, out in, and they were trying to gather food, quote unquote, through hunting for their families with game meat, right? And is it just that, or is it more than that? And what does that healing look like through that? And what does it mean? And so it brings about this story that has been shared to me about, like, how Hmong people have often gone outside of their villages in Laos and find a really old tree, a very old tree that's right outside of their village, and that they would pay homage and support to that tree, and that tree would be spiritually connected to the village and be a protector of the village, and that tree is the one that holds the values and the beliefs of how community actually responds to one another, and is in relationship to one another, and how they invest in one another, and how they connect to one another. And I think that we, in some ways, lost those connections, you know, and in particular for men and masculine folks, is how do we spend those moments, like what I did last week or 2 weeks ago with the men in my family, having conversations about our connection to, again, to earth and to the land, and how it's shaped us as men and masculine folks, and how it has also experienced harm from us. I'm sure it has. So that's where my thinking was at, and my reaction, but I'll let others share what they were thinking and what they're pondering as well too. As always, these are like just conversations for us to actually explore and lift up, and with you, and the work that you have so valiantly been doing for as long as you were in high school, right? From what you were sharing, or even beyond that to what you were sharing in terms of like looking at prior to birth for the programs that you created.
Yeah, I just wanted to pop in and say that is something, that piece of like what is my connection to the land? What is my role and responsibility within that? That I don't know if that has ever been a thought in my mind before this moment, to be quite honest. And so I think Pang, that you're, highlighting that, and Kareen, that you shared like how important that is to like the whole scope of like all of this powerful and probably really difficult work that y'all are doing down there. And it just makes me wonder, like, what would that even, like, where would someone even start, like, to try to find that connection, or try to reconnect, or like repair whatever that connection is that was like damaged, and maybe that's you know the colonization and how that sort of passed down, and the white supremacy that came all the way down, where it's like we will just take whatever we want, that sort of transactional, this land is our land kind of stuff, instead of actually seeing it as like, this is our home, this is our, our planet, and we're not only connected to all of the people on here, we're actually connected to the earth, the plants and animals and all of these things within creation. And so I'm curious about that, like where, I'm like, dang, where would I even start? And maybe I already have started now that I'm thinking about it, because I think for me, the other thing that stands out for me from what has been shared is, this concept of healing. And I think I have a lot of healing to do. And I think men and masculine folks in general have so much healing to do. And I know there have been times very recently where it's like I've been dealing with my own stuff and just feeling really down. And someone has said, well, why don't you go down to the lake? We're right near Lake Superior here. And the times that I actually have done that, where I have gone down and I just sit on a really cold rock, or, whatever it is, and can just sort of like be there in the silence and the stillness. For me, it sort of just makes everything that I'm dealing with feel so much smaller, because it's like I don't know. It's so easy to get focused on like those little things that feel really big right in the moment, and then kind of reconnecting to nature and being like, I'm actually just this tiny little part of this huge thing that is happening, and it almost feels magical in that way.
Just some like initial thoughts. Just thinking about like, there's a lot of like what I'm hearing, like a lot of love, like and strength too, in doing that work, because we spoke about it earlier. So like I feel like, it's always right to tell people, like, again, I'm biased, but I kind of give my head off to people who are doing the work that they're living in. I think a lot of the times we don't really realize that like at all, when like women of color have to literally do the same work that they're having to live with. And I mean that as if like they also are affected by it, right? Like, so I think sometimes we feel to like realize that is real love, like in your community, like that's like, and I was told earlier that is, and I agree, which is that is past strength. Like that's that ultimate form of strength. Is to have love for somebody who even doesn't agree with you, who doesn't give a fuck about, at the moment, who doesn't give a fuck about where you're going to go, where this conversation is going to go, where the community is going to go. Like that really does take that real love. It takes that. I also see that you're hurting, but I'm still willing to put my hand on you and love you. Because that shit is powerful. I can't even pretend like I'm not even there. Like I can't even pretend like I could do something like that. So I just wanted to acknowledge that. I think people don't acknowledge that as much. People who are of the work and doing it at the same time, like you're pretty much like gangster for doing that shit. And I don't mean it like to like throw the hat off. I mean it like you shouldn't have to do that work. Like it should have been us from the beginning to pick up that accountability and pick up the notion of how can we actually help, rather than being a problem or being a source of the problem. And I really love how you spoke about like doing the whole like work, like I don't know. I'm really big on like understanding that there is a certain amount of discipline that comes with love. I've been like having a hard time telling people like what it means, you know, because it sounds hard, right? Discipline sounds hard and love sounds good, right? But we forget that love is staring in the face of somebody who doesn't give a fucking saying, hey, I still want to be connected with you because it's true. We have to be connected. Um, and that's what I love. Like I love like hearing the facts of like, yeah, like we are, like I genuinely have embodied that and it made me feel like so much more better as a person. And as a male identified person to know that I'm connected. Um, just kind of reaching off of what Sean said, like I think you are like doing that work of understanding the nature. Because immediately when you asked that question, I was like, well, I would just sit with it, like literally sit with the nature and then like kind of see what they need and kind of ask them, you know, in that unspoken way. Because I agree, like I am a prime person that like used to take away a lot from nature, not give a fuck. Like this is my literally like we literally step on the land, we spit on it, we do all these things. And then we also, right, we wanted to protect us. We wanted to bring us like nurture and love and these things. So we really do have a uneven and unbalanced like relationship with nature um, deeply. You know, and I've embodied that more, just trying to understand like what that truly looks like. Um, and yeah, we're just basically on this thing. Like when I got to the point, I was like, all right, we're on this like motion or platform to where like I always say we're not shit and we are shit at the same time. I say we are shit because like, yeah, we're all people who have multi-talents and multi-skills. And I say we not shit because once we're gone, this thing called life and this thing called the world is still going to keep spinning. So that's actually when you realize like, damn, that is my responsibility. It's to help it keep going in a way that's smooth, even though I'm not here no more. That's the essence of like realize like when I like learn connection, I'm like, how have I been so fucking selfish? Like this is about the connectivity. Like I have nephews, I have nieces, I have people who are gonna still be here. The earth is still gonna be here when I'm gone. So I actually have to help protect this thing that we call earth, like motherland, like what we call it. Like we have to protect it. Um, so I agree too. It is like a responsibility to each other, whether we like it, whether we understand it. Um, I think a lot of us see that hard work as, yeah, we don't see it as the love to our community, to our mission, to our connection. Because yeah, talking to somebody who, yeah, for me as a Black man, talking to somebody who does not fucking like me because of my color, like that to me is protecting the community and protecting my mission because I have to get this done. I have to have even this tough conversation with this person for him, her, or they to actually understand why they're even in that mode of hating somebody because of their color. Um, so I loved it. I love like I put down a couple of things like just, you know, who you are in doing that work. Um, you know, the whole, the good and the bad, having discipline throughout love, and connecting to like the nature, like understanding that we are here for a reason. We have the responsibility, like it's gonna keep spinning when we're gone. So we actually do have to help do stuff and um, protect and help so that way it can keep spinning like in a way that it's functional. You know, to think that after you're gone, like fuck it, nothing else is gonna go down is very, very selfish. To be like, I'm only gonna take throughout my lifetime. Like I only probably live like, you know, hopefully 80 to 100 years, but that's not even close to how long we've had this thing called Earth. So who am I to be like, I need to take when this thing has been here way longer than me? If anything, they should be taking it from us. Like, and that's not even the case either. Nature is still here to provide for us, even when we're cutting the trees down where we're not supposed to, even when we're burning shit we're not supposed to. Like, and it's funny how nature is still with us. They're still willing to be connected. So that was just my initial thoughts, and a little scattered, but thank y'all for hanging in there.
Absolutely. Thank you, everyone. I think personally, working with the Latino community, that connection to our land, that connection to our family communities, what they have been me being successful having this type of conversations just because it's that connection to our land, like you guys all mentioned, to our values, importance of our actions. And really, you know, when you're working with community, when you realize your, you know, your role, the impact that you have in your behavior, how you behave, how you act, it is huge. You know, once you're working with men, sometimes you're having conversation about masculinity, gender-based violence. You know, they understand that, but you know, once you go there more in deep, have these conversations in deep, is when they realize, you know what, I need to do something. You know, the little action that I can take, it can change someone's life, it can change a community, and that's I think why we've been some type of successful that way, just creating that deeper connection or connection to our land, even using our natural resources, having conversations outside in a park, while we're fishing, while we're just having a walk with a coworker, with a family member or your spouse. I think there's so much there. There's so much energy. There's so much love when you go outside and you really enjoy that. And our impact, in their little ones is huge when we have this conversation with them. So I'm really grateful for this conversation. And yeah, I think a really great way to connect is through that. It's just been having this meaningful conversation and our impact, in future generations, like Serrano said, we're not responsible what happened in the past, but we're maybe responsible now for what's starting now and the future. We have the power in working together. Asians, Latino, and that's all communities. I think we can have a huge impact. Not seeing ourselves as a minority, so we're seeing ourselves as a whole. With the white folks, everyone. I think if we work together, we can start changing this, instead of separating each other and fighting each other. So yeah.
So wow. So this reminds me a little bit of drinking carrot juice, and I'll explain that a little bit. So there's this carrot juice I drink, but I can only drink it periodically because for some reason, when I drink this carrot juice, I feel it inside in a way that I don't feel with cooling water. It does something to my center, and so I just feel it inside my body in a way that makes me feel alive, and also is very uncomfortable because because I'm like, what is going on? Sometimes these conversations, right, do the same sort of thing, right, where you're like, whoa, wow. You're not really sure. It's a good thing to feel it, right? It means you're kind of at one with something, but it also is a little bit uncomfortable. So I've been sort of viewing this conversation in that sense of all of these sort of things that it enlivens. And two things I think come to mind in particular. One is the talk about keeping the world spinning and how that necessitates, right, seemingly a sort of particular role that is in tune and not out of tune with keeping it moving, right? Because if everyone's just kind of keeping it moving with different vibrations, then it doesn't, you don't maximize the spinning, right? The other thing that I was thinking of as you were talking is you mentioned sort of the powerful women that you were watching as you grew up doing this work. And I was wondering if when you say that, if you were saying it in the context of there are sort of these facets or these things these women were working on that collectively, right, they were powerful women, but you could identify sort of, this one's powerful because she brings this lens, right? Or this one's powerful because she does this. And I was trying to apply that to men and masculine folks. And when we're talking about, in your conversation about powerful women, I was wondering who we look at as powerful men, and if we unbundle them in a way that I'm wondering if you unbundled, if you will, the powerful women. So if there are facets that you're like, yep, we kind of need 5, if you will, sort of types of powerful women, are there types of powerful men that we also need that parallel that sort of will help be kind of the doula, right, for other men trying to heal and learn how to heal and learn how to participate in, I think, the continuing of that sort of spinning of this earth, if you will. Does that make sense as a question?
Wow. That was I mean, it's a lot that you all shared in the listening and the reflecting. And yes, I think that's a really good question. And when we look at it, right, like we are always in this place of transformation and change, and as much as I don't like it at times, that's what it is. And I think the people that come into your life at different time frames are who is needed at that moment, right? This is what my elders have taught me. And they can come in the form of those that are really supportive and loving and caring, and they can come in the form of those that are challenging and hurtful and harmful, right? And also that Lena shared that any one of us is not immune from causing harm to another. And it's also our ability to reflect and to take responsibility, right? When you've done that, whether somebody brings that up to you or not, if you know that you've done harm, like you need to come in and say and take accountability. And when somebody comes to you and says that you have caused harm, that you need to sit with it and figure out, okay, how do I do this differently? What do I need to do or change? What do I need to do or transform? And that change and transformation may not happen in that moment. It may happen 10 years from now, right? When that seed that they planted then comes back into this reality to say, whoa, that's what that person was telling me, or this is what this relationship was trying to teach me. So I think the women came in different forms. They came in those that were wanting to change their own behaviors in substance use and chose to become sober. They came in the form of women that were challenging their relationships and partnerships and chose to leave or chose to stay, right, in that partnership. I think these are the dynamics that we talk about in domestic violence, and all of these things, the traumas that we experience. There are places that I sat in a classroom when I was in college, and this professor made this comment around Native Americans and alcohol. And I didn't do anything but sit in my chair and cry in that moment. Cried, and I didn't say anything. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't challenge him on all the things that I knew that we had just covered that would have challenged everything that he said. I was ashamed and I was embarrassed, right? Because that is the history of my family. And then going back to my dorm room and like crying and being the only Native in my college, right? And like calling my parents, and they're like, we're getting on a plane, or you're getting on a plane, you're coming home, you're not staying there, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, no, none of that. Like, because I left home to go to school. And I also had relatives say, why are you going away to school? Why don't you stay here like everybody else? So it's also like that piece. And I think about my stubbornness at times, like when people have told me you cannot do this, and I'm like, I'm going to show you whether that was good or bad or whatever. But that stubbornness helped me get through some challenging times. It also placed me in places of danger a lot of times, right? And so it's like that relationship we have with those behaviors and those pieces of like, thank you for this stubbornness, or thank you for this anger at this moment, because anger, with all the stuff that we're facing with white supremacy and sexual assault and all of this stuff, anger got me through some of the toughest shit out there, right? But there's also a place and time that I need to put anger aside and embrace vulnerability in the fullness of that vulnerability, which is scary as heck, right? And I think that's the dance that we're all doing in this place of, I can understand the anger. And I'm also at this age in my life where I don't want to be angry anymore, right? I don't want, like, anger, if it's not released, it comes back at you in self-harm and in body aches and these ways that we know that internalized racism does, right? Like that, the way we put it back onto ourselves when we can't say it. And I'm done biting my tongue on a lot of different things as well, which also causes harm to the people I'm in a relationship with, because sometimes it doesn't come out in the most beautiful, nice, oh, you hurt me. It's like, right? Like this, right? So that they know that they caused it, like that rattlesnake. It's like, I'm rattling and I'm going to go. But yeah, like, I think that's the place for us as humans, right? In this struggle and in this place, And I'm like, the love piece that we talk about, right? Like love. And then like the same thing, like people think love is like this woo woo thing. Love is the hardest thing to do, to love unconditionally, you know, and having those models of women that also, and men that also shared that and showed that. And for me, it comes back also to this place of spirituality, right? Like that there is something bigger and beyond us. And that spirituality and those pieces that got us through those darkest moments. When I think of the heroes in my life are those that have gone through the deepest suffering and haven't replicated that suffering for others, that have not hated those who hated them, right? And I'm like, how the heck did they do that? Because I struggle with that daily. Like, how do I do this? I like, and a lot of us perpetrate that against ourselves, that we hate and cannot love ourselves because of all of these other experiences that we've had, you know, so that self-love, you know, I'm trying to learn that piece, like that self-love, in order then to see love in another, right? And have that unconditional. So I'm still on that journey. And my mother has been a big part of that. My parents' relationship has been a big part of that, right? Because we talk about like domestic violence and leaving, like, why didn't she leave him? Why are we still here? And then I think about they're still together and we're still struggling as a family in this dynamic, but we're committed to struggling in that dynamic together, right? So like there's these places of like leaving is great and good, but also staying and struggling in the dynamic can also have its benefits. But we don't know where that balance is, right? Like I think we're in this process of like, how do we, and as a survivor of sexual violence and the men in my community and other communities that are familiar to me, and saying things or not saying things, like voicing it and not voicing it and holding that. I think that's a challenge, right? Because the easy part is to like, again, like put them in jail or put them here or put them there, but we know they're going to come back to our community. And so how are we really looking at this deep transformation? We talk about racism. How are we looking at this deep transformation and healing that needs to happen in our country? When we talk about like the reconnection to nature as well, like so there's a lot of these different layers, right? And so that we're looking at the nature piece of it, like in this country where people are displaced, people have been displaced from their homelands and have come and settled onto this continent where there were already people that existed, but they weren't seen as people. They were seen as less than, not human, vast open spaces, right? And so we're as a country here struggling with this place where people were also displaced from their homelands and brought here to serve others, right? To be that property, to be that, you know, and so it's like we have so much to reconnect to as individuals, as families, as communities. And we find ourselves now together on Mother Earth here, Na'ochokwiyo here in this country called America, or this country called the United States, which geographically, right, is still incorrect. But in the governmental sense is, you know, that's the way they do this. But now we're here together. So how do we do this? And how do we recognize the harm that is caused and continues to be caused by white supremacy, by colonization, by genocide, by policies, right? And in this space right now with you all is we're in this place where no life can exist in this country without somebody passing through the body of a woman or a woman folk, right? And yet we're at this place where women are so disregarded and only seen as body parts. And we don't see the humanness of women. We don't see the humanness of men. We don't see the humanness of Na'ochokwiyo, our Earth Mother, and the spirits and the energies that exist here. That's a life force, right? Like the carrot juice that you mentioned, that's a life force. You're taking in another life force to continue your life force. And so how are we doing that and acknowledging those in these different ways? Like water is the life force of all people, not just one people, all people. No life exists for us without water and air, for any human person being, regardless of gender, sexuality. And so again, going back to like, that's our primarily, we should be all protecting our Earth Mother and her gifts, because none of us can exist, no matter how rich or how poor we are, none of us can exist without that. And we're fighting and we're doing these wars over these things because people are recognizing that, right? We are all minerals. When we when we perish and we go back into our Mother Earth. And then we resustain life, right? We're in this globe that's a recycling of water and air. And so as many as scientists try, they cannot replicate that. They cannot replicate that, right? So how do we continue to sustain ourselves? And how do we continue to sustain with an energy that is feeding that of love and not an energy that is sustaining that based on violence, right? And we've had this transformation on economy. And when we talk about localized economy, so the story that Peng shared around the tree and the Hmong people and that protector, right? And so we know in our work as well with gardening and localized economies that people will not be able to protect Mother Earth if they cannot get to the place of touching her, being engaged with her in different ways. And so cities and blocks and where you don't have green spaces and why you don't have windows in certain buildings and these things, you know, those are all intentional designs, right? And so how do we go back to that reclaiming? And I feel like this movement of urban gardens, this movement of connecting our people back to gardening and farming, when we talk about the pandemic, right? You saw how everything shut down and then we realized like the essential workers are really the people who are gathering the food from the gardens and getting them on the boats and the trains and all of that. And then we're not respecting them. We're not appreciating that. The grocery stores are shut. And if you don't have that transportation and you're in a city, where are you getting that? Then you're getting that from the people that have maintained their relationship or relearned to reconnect back to Mother Earth and how we then grow food and how we then share and all of those different pieces. And so for a lot of our work, you know, around environmental justice has been about, you know, community gardening, individual gardening, because we had come from this valley that is rich. Before the economy of war that came into our area, which is Los Alamos National Laboratory, we were all farming. Our tribal communities were all farming. And then that got taken away and that green vegetable and green food economy got replaced by paper money that we cannot eat. We cannot eat money, like, right? Like, and so like we need to come to this realization of these different pieces and also like the reclaiming of our humanity, like Lena talked about, like we have to reclaim our humanity to recognize that my survival is based on each one of you here in this forum right now, and is based on each everyone in my community, is based on, you know, people in the globe, because those that are around the world from us, we know from research and science that what happens there is going to impact us here, right? We know of tsunamis, we know of these different leaks that are happening and things that are going on. So we're not isolated and protected. There's no way that any of us can be like that, right? And for us to be like that then suffocates us. We see also in the pandemic, when we were having to isolate by ourselves, like we are social beings, we need people. We need that connection. We need that feeling and touching, and babies need it. We need it as adults. What then becomes this place around the violence is that need has then been exploited in different ways. And so how do we get back to that place of healing? Like if sex is, you know, when we talk about sex positive and body positive, like that should be like beautiful things, right? And then the opposite or the other continuum end of that is then the violence and the rape and the murder and the using of people's bodies, right? And so again, how are we going back to like reclaiming some of these pieces to ourselves, to the world, and the place that we cannot be neutral, right? We cannot be neutral. We have to take action. We have to do, once we become aware of something, we should be responding and doing something, right? Because I'm like, right now we're in this country where the Supreme Court is trying to argue around Roe v. Wade. They were strategic in placing people in that position that they continue to claim is neutral and objective, when if it was neutral and objective, why would it matter if they replaced them with these three people or not, right? Like if what president did it, it's not neutral, it's not objective. You know, and so, you know, we are subjective people, we are conscious in those different ways, and we have the ability to make the decisions. I know in the power and control, like our children don't have that ability. They can tell some adult, no, don't touch me, no, don't do this. That adult needs to then have the core values and responsibility to not cause harm to that young person. and to own the responsibility that they have in that caretaking role. You know, and so we have this flipping and skewing of our values and our ways that we approach things. And so I think that for me is like the part that gets overwhelming at times, because it also comes down to, like, again, I am as accountable to this work, to the people, and surrounding myself with people that can also do that. And so, and also appreciating those that challenged me in different ways and helped me learn a lesson that I'm taking, right? Like when I think about my experience as a survivor, like there's places where I could have continued down the road of self-hate and self-harm, and just, you know, wanting to not be and exist in this world anymore. Or I could take that and create programs and create ways that other young people who are experiencing something could then have a chance or realize that this didn't have to be the way and we can transform it. And so I feel like, I know it's challenging in the nonprofit complex because that's where we exist. And this place of like how we look at alternative economies, like I think we all need to still continue to have these conversations for us to be able to have that hope and to have that transformation, and to realize those particular things. And as an Indigenous woman, when I hear people say, oh, the Indigenous people have the solution for environmental justice, oh, fuck no, hell no. We're not the only ones responsible for this. You know, we didn't cause this. There's policies and strategies and approaches and, you know, things that occurred. So that means it takes all of us to undo it, right? And Indigenous people don't hold just the spirituality for the world. We all need to seek that and find that within ourselves and feed that spiritual energy in this world. Because we all have it, no matter who we are, no matter the color of our skin or our ethnicity or our age, or our gender or our sexuality or all of these things, right? And I feel like the work that in this piece, it's been most challenging for me in healing and trying to heal this, the relationship with male and masculine folks, is what I heard in Lena's talk, right? Like how to deeply trust someone not to harm me anymore, right? And to still hold places of that, to be like, they're causing harm and maybe they're not aware of that right now, so I need to voice it, so that we're doing this exchange, and transforming it. But that's still the hardest part for me, because men, patriarchy, male, masculine presenting folks are benefiting from that patriarchy. And yes, there's this rematriation movement and all of this, but I don't feel like any one of us holds the answer. Like it's not patriarchy or matriarchy. It is really this complementary, mutually respectful way that we were all supposed to coexist in this world. That coexistence, that interconnection, that ecology. The ecology is meant to be diverse. The ecology does not survive when it is mono anything. And so we need to think about how we move in that diversity, in that ecological way, and understanding that me alone I don't survive by me alone, right? I've never been able to survive by me alone. It's always in that relation. It's always in that interconnection. Yeah, I can also go on soapboxes and tangents, so sorry if I did that.
Oh, all good. I really appreciate you outlining and highlighting and pointing and challenging and pushing, I think, all of us to really think about what does it, I think to me, you know, like what does it really mean in terms of our accountability and in terms of our responsibility as men and masculine folks, right? Particularly in community with one another and the way in which we move. And I think at times these conversations that we have here in the Kitchen Table Conversation series may feel like it's lopsided or may feel like it's moved politically too far right or too far left or to wherever it may be that people are thinking. But I think what you're sharing, and I think so much of what you're sharing, particularly that is so fruitful and that's so helpful, is the ecology of the environment of diversity and how we move through that and how we, and I as a masculine person and a male identified person, am in relationship to all of that, right? To all of what is around me, not just the relationships that I am in, but my relationship to that of spirituality, my relationship to that of the land and environment that I am in, that I often take from without thinking, that I often don't hesitate to actually just take in the air and don't even question why I am taking it in, or don't even question about where it's actually coming from and how I should actually be giving back to it in some ways. And so I think about that in terms of what you were sharing there. And I think that that's why these conversations are so meaningful for many of us who've been doing these conversations for a long time, and that it's not just conversations, but it is conversations meant to provoke responsibility, meant to provoke and continue that loving accountability that you're talking about in responsible ways to be healthy and in responsible ways to the relationships that we hold in our life and that particularly of the environment and that particularly of Earth and to one another, right? And I think that you're highlighting the complexity and the nuances in how we as men and masculine folks can actually be doing that for ourselves and for our community and for the ways in which we show up in the environment and for the ways in which we actually navigate in the environment as well too, in that complexity and in that nuance, and particularly that diversity, right? That diversity that you're naming. So that's what's resonating to me, and I appreciate the push and I appreciate the expansion and the depth of the additions that you really allowed for me to really think about in this conversation. So I appreciate that. I'll send it off to others to share some of their closing thoughts or places where they're at and where their heart is or where their body and mind is at before Sean sort of gives us a closure here. But thank you, Corinne.
Well, Corinne, that was, thank you for being here. It's amazing to listen to you. There's no way you cannot be inspired after hearing you and now feel all pumped up, ready to continue the conversation with the groups that we're working right now. And also understanding, that maybe growing up didn't have that stubbornness that you had, and me maybe being a white man, it just being quiet made me a problem just because I didn't stand up, even that I have values that show me how to be a better man. Maybe not being stubborn enough, I just feel comfortable and just didn't say anything and make me part of the problem. So how we can encourage and give that, power to the youth, to the boys and those communities of color to stand up, don't be scared, and that's something that I heard all the time in the schools, they from the youth, they don't feel that they're listened, they don't feel they have power. And every time that situations of sexual assault happen in schools don't provide in the space to them to have these type of conversations. So it's really sad, but after this conversation, very, very empowered, very happy to be here. Also listen to the question that Roderick had, what are those male, leaders, there's all around us, and listen to Peng, Roderick, we have so many good role models and leaders that's why we're having these conversations, because we understand that together we're powerful, and very grateful to be around all of you guys. So thank you, Corinne, thank you, Peng, Roderick, Serrano and Sean. Very humble to be here, and yeah, looking forward to keep having this conversation. And again, super excited to have you here, Corinne. You're very inspiring to not just me, for a lot of men and also women. I'm sure they're listening to this conversation.
I would echo Felix. Thank you, Corinne.
Yeah, I'm in deep brief mode. So thank you. Because throughout the entire thing, like I didn't have a question. Something in my soul was just like to listen. And I feel like we all kind of felt a little bit of that. So I'm glad to listen, and I'm glad that you were open and honest with us. So thank you.
Yeah, have a lot that is going through up here. And I'm also trying to think about like, how can I actually like get that to move through the rest of me as well? So, and, and, yeah, it's just, it's so easy for me and so many of us to stay up here and we're just disconnected from the rest of us and our hearts, our bodies, you know, our breath. And, so I'm also just feeling really grateful for everything that you've shared here, Kareen. And it just, yeah, it just makes me think about that connection piece. Like I can't do better, be better, or help others be better if we're not actually all in that connection. Like I never would have thought about that. Well, I shouldn't say I never would have thought about this, but you know, like I said, like this connection to land thing has not been something that I've ever really thought about. And so the fact that you're here today, like sharing that with me and with all of us is, you know, it's like one step at a time, each of us share that wisdom, and then we can actually take that and sort of like bring it into our own wisdom as well. So thank you, Kareen, for being here. And thanks to all my siblings as always, and Juliana behind the scenes doing our tech stuff. Thank you for that. And we also want to thank our funding partners who are Blue Cross Blue Shield of Minnesota, as well as the Novo Foundation for all of their support and partnership in making these conversations happen and continue to happen. And just as a reminder, we will be back here in 2 weeks. We're meeting every other week on Thursdays at noon, and that's Central Standard Time. So our next conversation will be Thursday, December 16th at 12 p.m. So don't forget to like our page, turn on notifications so you know when we're chatting. You can join us, you can ask your questions, share your thoughts. We would love to hear that. And you can also check out all our previous 31 conversations on YouTube. So go watch all of them. They're beautiful and we learn a lot together through those. So thank you again to all of y'all and to our viewers. And we hope you take good care until next time.
Thank you. Bye-bye.